Hello everyone. In this video, we will be discussing about the recent amendment in Rule 37 of the CGST Rules 2017. So before discussing the amendment in Rule 37, let us first understand the second proviso to Section 16(2), which is corresponding to Rule 37. As per second proviso to Section 16(2), recipient who fails to pay to supplier an amount towards value of supply along with tax payable within 180 days from date of issuance of invoice, an amount equal to ITC availed by recipient shall be added to his output tax liability with interest in manner prescribed. So it's important to note that in the second proviso to Section 16(2), there is a requirement that the payment by recipient should be made to supplier within 180 days from date of issuance of invoice. On non-compliance of the same, there will be a payment of amount equal to ITC availed along with interest applicable. So let us understand what are the implications in case of any non-compliances under Rule 37. So let us first understand what was the old Rule 37 all about and what are the recent amendments in Rule 37. So in the old Rule 37, the recipient was required to furnish details of proportionate amount of value of supply not paid to supplier within 180 days in GSTR 2. Whereas post-amendment, the recipient is required to furnish details of ITC availed but tax not paid to supplier within 180 days in GSTR 3. So the difference in the post-amendment in Rule 37 is that earlier, the recipient was required to provide details of proportionate amount which is not paid to the supplier or it was delayed in paying to the supplier. However, post-amendment, the recipient is required to furnish details of ITC availed. So the amendment is silent on whether the ITC, the 100% ITC availed has to be furnished or proportionate amount of value of supply not paid has to be furnished in GSTR 3B. Another important change is with respect to the return in which this amount has to be disclosed. Earlier, the details were required to be disclosed in GSTR 2, and now, since GSTR 2 was never implemented and was never effective, hence this has been replaced with GSTR 3B. So in our view, since the amendment Rule 37 is silent on the amount which is required to be disclosed in GSTR 3B, whether it is proportionate or not, in our view, it should be proportionate amount of ITC availed against which the payment has been delayed to supplier. The next condition of Rule 37 earlier was that the ITC availed pertaining to delayed payment of tax has to be paid as output tax liability by the recipient in month in which details are furnished in GSTR 2. Whereas under amended Rule 37, the amount payable equivalent to ITC availed has to be paid by the recipient. So the difference here post amendment is that earlier it was clear that the ITC which has been availed wrongly basis the delayed payment of tax, that amount has to be disclosed in the return and paid as an output tax liability. However, post amendment, it says the amount payable equivalent to ITC availed has to be reported. So the term amount payable, it doesn't say that this is the amount of ITC which is availed. It only says that whatever amount will be paid by the recipient, it will be considered equivalent to the ITC availed. Another condition in Rule 37 was that once this ITC is being reversed and output tax liability is being paid by the recipient, interest is payable at rate notified under Section 51 from date of availing credit till the actual date of payment of tax. However, under the amended Rule 37, interest is payable under Section 50. So the difference here post amendment is, firstly, earlier it mentioned that the interest would be payable at the rate specified under Section 51. So basically, earlier the Rule 37, it borrowed the rate from Section 50. However, post-amendment, it says that interest will be payable under Section 50, and it not only borrows the rate, it basically provides a section under which the interest will be levied. Secondly, in the old Rule 37, there was a period prescribed for the during which this interest will be levied. That was from the date on which the credit has been availed till the actual date of payment. However, post-amendment, this period is silent in the amended Rule 37, and it only says that interest has to be paid under Section 50. So it will be interesting to understand that what impact will it create in the future transactions for the taxpayers. The last requirement under Rule 37 was that time limit of Section 16(4) would not be applicable for re-availing ITC reversed earlier. And similar provision continues under amended Rule 37. The time limit would not be applicable of Section 16(4) for re-availing the ITC reversed earlier. Notably, all the changes in amended Rule 37 would be applicable effective 1st of October 2022. Now, as we have already discussed what are the amendments, what was the old provision all about, let us now discuss what are the still open issues and ambiguities which might create issues in practical industry. So the first issue which might be arising in many transactions would be whether the interest would be payable after expiry of 180 days or from the date on which the ITC was actually availed by the recipient. So as we discussed in the previous slide, that earlier the time period for which interest is to be paid was very clear under Rule 37. However, post-amendment, the period is silent, and hence we can interpret in a way that interest would be payable after expiry of 180 days till the actual payment of the output tax liability. Also, as earlier in the Rule 37, it was mentioned that the rate of interest would be borrowed from Section 50, subsection 1. However, in the amended Rule 37, it says that interest would be levied under Section 50, which means that the interest will be either levied under Section 51 or Section 53. Also, in case of amended Rule 37, there has been amendment which states that an amount equivalent to the ITC availed has to be paid, which means that it talks about the amount which is payable. It doesn't talk about that the ITC availed has to be paid as an output tax liability. So if we talk about Section 50, subsection 3, it is applicable in cases where the ITC has been wrongly availed and utilized. So in this scenario, we cannot say that the ITC has been wrongly availed and utilized. It is merely a delayed payment of tax which is being made by the recipient. So hence, Section 53 would not be applicable in the present scenario. Also, in case of Section 51, this would not be applicable for interest recovery. Another open issue would be regarding amendment would be applicable retrospectively or prospectively. Since this rule has been substituted with effect from 1st of October, so this should be read as a retrospective change in Rule 37 and not prospectively. So having said that, if this amendment is to be read as retrospective, then in that case, even the cases where in the earlier tax period, if any taxpayer has already made the payment of interest starting from the date of availment of ITC till actual date of payment of output tax liability to government, in that case, they can claim a refund of the excess interest paid for such period. So that's all from our side. Thank you for watching this video.